Hi. Welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, senior film writer for Now Magazine, and welcome to the show. My guest this week is Jennifer Liao, a director and producer whose first feature, End of Days, Inc., is a dark workplace comedy about a handful of file clerks who come to believe they're closing down a lot more than just their company. It opens in Toronto this Friday, February 19th at the Carlton Cinemas and plays the International Women in Film Festival in Vancouver March 11th, and you'll be able to watch it on demand in April. To my delight, Jennifer picked Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, Edgar Wright's delirious 2010 adaptation of Brian Lee O'Malley's massive graphic novel cycle about a Toronto musician who falls for a whip-smart young woman named Ramona Flowers, only to learn that he has to battle her 7 evil exes to be worthy of dating her. The movie is an absolute joy, a jukebox of wonderful moments played out in delirious cinematic style, and featuring a cast that just keeps getting richer and deeper every time we revisit it. Yes, I warn you, I mispronounce Ramona's name pretty early in the conversation, but only once, and I'm sorry. This is Someone Else's Movie.
Well, I do listen to the podcast, so I have thought about it quite at length, which movie I would choose were I invited to be on it. So it was actually very exciting to be invited because all of a sudden I was like, oh, this isn't theoretical anymore. I can actually pick a movie. And of course you kind of want to go, oh, well, maybe we should pick something that's a little more reflective of, you know, your cinephile bona fides or whatever, that kind of thing. But ultimately, Scott Pilgrim's just one of those movies that I've seen twice in the theater.
Right.
And it's one of those movies I went to when I saw it at the theater the first time, I immediately wanted to see it again. And I've seen it many times since. And it's like a shot of adrenaline for me. It's one of those movies where I just find it so funny and entertaining and such an inventive creative film that, you know, I would definitely put it on a list of one of my favorites. So, you know, and it seems like it would be a fun one to talk about as well, because it really is, it really is a burst of, you know, color and sound and light and all that type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I love it. I'm an Edgar Wright acolyte from way back when, and I was just saying that I'm amazed that it's taken almost a year of the show being around to get to an Edgar movie. And this one being first is actually kind of great as well, because it's the one that stands apart from the Cornetto trilogy, and it's a distinctive vision in a different way for him. And of course it was shot in Toronto, so it's now a time capsule of itself, because most of the locations have changed, and a lot of the places that it takes place are gone, or different. And I just introduced it at the Royal. Now has a free flick Mondays thing we do every month, and it was a full house. It was our first capacity crowd, and it was just so much damn fun. And people, you know, in the little less than 6 years since it was released, people are discovering it and forcing it on their friends, and as with all of Edgar Wright's films, it picks up more momentum after the theatrical release than it does beforehand.
I think that's true. Yeah, I absolutely think that's true. And what's sort of interesting is that I actually came to the film from the books. Mm-hmm. When they actually announced that Edgar Wright was attached to the adaptation of Scott Pilgrim, I just thought that was a perfect marriage of subject matter and director. But I was reading the books, and it also felt like the books were a little bit of that thing where people would nudge you and go, hey, have you seen these yet? It was very much that way. And I mean, I was even on the streetcar. I was on the college streetcar, and a gentleman who I'm 90% sure was Don McKellar. I don't want to say 100% because I'm not entirely positive, but I'm pretty sure it was him. He hopped on the streetcar and he noticed I was reading one of the Scott Pilgrim books, and he got really excited and he said, "Is that the new one?" And I don't think it was at the time. I think I was still catching up or something like that. And then he hopped off the streetcar for 2 stops or something like that.
I like to think that Don McKellar is a sort of a sprite that just appears and disappears in Toronto to inspire people. And actually, if he got on at Bathurst, he would get off a couple of stops later.
Oh,
so,
would he? Oh, okay.
Probably was him.
All right.
And Don is in the film.
Of course,
so,
yeah.
You know, that hat trick is completed. It's a quintessential Toronto movie, and I think as a result, it got undervalued. Like, almost playing into the Canadian identity crisis, you needed an English filmmaker to make Toronto cool.
Right.
And then because it's doubly removed, doubly culty, the American culture just, well, they didn't reject it exactly, but they didn't know what to do with it. And so it has this reputation as this wonderful little, I mean, I see it bonding people for decades down the line as they discover, and like, oh my God, Beck wrote a song for this, and that's Broken Social Scene, and this is, and you like these things too. Like it's a fantastic date movie because also it's about a terribly inept dater.
Right, that's true.
But it plays to all of the strengths of Canadian cinema without ever falling into the traps of Canadian cinema, which is that certain things have to happen in a certain way to mandate the to satisfy the imaginary audience of Canadian filmgoers who never really seem to exist. We're far more amorphous breed than telefilm would have you believe.
Well, I do think it's a popcorn movie in a way that I don't know that Canada has ever necessarily embraced, or it's something maybe we don't find to be our strength, possibly because of financial limitations as well. I mean, you definitely have to consider that. And what I liked about the books was really that idea that we were taking that kind of lo-fi, young urbanite trying to be creative, but really just hanging out, trying to date, all that type of thing. But then putting it through this worldview that's all video games and popcorn cinema and comic books, and really giving it almost like an updated millennial version of a Walter Mitty-esque character or something like that. And that was really exciting. And I mean, it's rare that people will say a Canadian movie is fun, and that's sort of, this movie is definitely fun. And of course, I'm not putting down Canadian cinema in that way. I just mean like this. It was interesting that this was a movie that was made by a British director and American company and all that type of thing, but it is very much a love letter to Toronto, and it really shows off Toronto in all its cold and snowy glory, as well as all of the exciting venues you can visit, the types of places that you can see that like Casa Loma, or or old school Lee's Palace and that type of thing, where there is a lot of creative energy and people who are really motivated to live a creative life and to be better people, or to at least figure out themselves. If not to be better people, then at least to start the process of being self-aware. Yeah. And of course, at the end of the film, Scott Pilgrim earns the power of self-awareness, and that is a first step into being kind of a more evolved human being, a more mature human being, as it were.
I'm glad that the power of self-awareness is still out there, because I think I'm still chasing it, and someday, I hope to level up by the time I'm 50.
It can be challenging, for sure.
But that's the wonderful aspect of the movie, is that as much of a screw-up as Scott is, and as hopeless as he is in so many things, in the movie, in his head, which is I think what we're seeing, he's great at kung fu, he's a reasonably talented musician, he's maybe not confident with women, but he's able to string knives along until Ramona really throws him for a loop. And Michael Cera, when he was cast, was not someone I would have thought would be right for Scott. And the first time I met him was on the interviews for Youth in Revolt, and I think they were just finishing the shoot for Scott Pilgrim. It was definitely just around the corner, and he couldn't talk about it. He was he was avoiding all conversation, to the point where it got really difficult to talk about Youth in Revolt, because I hated that, and I would really have much rather been talking about his next picture.
Right.
And he was willing to talk about Edgar Wright's directorial approach and collaboration and the way they were shooting, but he just absolutely refused to divulge anything about the movie, which is fine, but limiting in the conversation. And then the movie comes out, and I get it. You couldn't talk about this. How could you describe it to someone without showing it to them? Because the approach, the comic booky approach, even now, 6 years later, seems, it's audacious, but it seems undoable, unfilmable, that they're actually translating it's one thing to use the comics as storyboards. People do that, and it works. And they've definitely relied on that. Edgar told me, I think during the DVD interviews, that he'd almost killed himself trying to match an angle for the sneaky beats, because the angle that Brian Lee O'Malley drew wasn't exactly right. It wasn't a photo reference. He just drew it from memory, and as a result, something didn't line up, and they were just, there must be a way to do this. Are we going to have to use CG? How do we make this work? What's missing? And it turned out the telephone poles just weren't in the right place.
Right.
But they were like, obsessively trying to recreate the frame. And instead, it is this amazing illustration of an illustrated novel. It's just an extra layer of art on top of everything. You know, the Batman style popped punch words, for lack of a better term, the supers on that, and the way that the bass radiates or the music radiates at the very beginning, and the way the opening sequence is just so incredibly seductive, and it sort of pulls you into this alternate heightened reality. It's just so much damn fun too. And how do you even begin to describe that to someone who hasn't seen it? Oh,
absolutely. And it is interesting because, you know, a story like Walter Mitty, I don't know about the film because I haven't seen the film, but the original, and I'm sure it's very different from the original story, which is, you know, a few pages long at most.
Purely internal narrative.
Yes, it's purely an internal narrative, and there's a definite separation between reality and fiction, whereas in Scott Pilgrim, they accept the fictions as part of the reality, and you wouldn't even, it's not even clear that it is fictions. I mean, yeah, if it is fiction, because there is the idea that you just accept that, oh yeah, there's a route running through my head, running through Scott's head, that's just easy for me to travel when when I'm working for Amazon or whatever. Just things like that, where they accept that as part of the reality. But then I think what makes the film really work is the fact that the characters, for the most part, the central characters, at least, they have an authenticity to them that is very relatable and real.
Yeah.
So even though they do have heightened personalities, and they are living in heightened circumstances and in a heightened reality, you still recognize the authenticity of who they are, and so that's why you care about it, and that's why it's not just an explosion of you know, crazy editing and icons, and you know, because that could be very annoying and distracting if that were the case.
And it would have no stakes. Like if you establish that none of this is real, as opposed to it's more real than real. It's the way the film is presented to us. Everything matters. Although, and they talked about this as well, is like if you take it literally, he is killing people. People are trying to kill Scott, and Scott is successfully murdering them. Just because they turn into coins, that doesn't make it right.
Right.
What they get away with in an incredible kind of leap, an intuitive leap, is that there are no authority figures. The only authority figures that are there are the cartoons of the vegan police, and there are no cops, there are no parents, there are no adults, really. I mean, Thomas Jane, I think, is the oldest person in the entire movie, and he's utterly ineffectual.
Right.
But you're dealing with a reality that is the reality that you kind of have in your head when you're 22, and you don't really know how the world works, but you have a pretty good idea. I mean, I think that just that the subspace route through Scott's brain as an Amazon delivery thing is brilliant, because no one in 2003 really understood how Amazon worked.
That's true.
You clicked some buttons and a book came. That was amazing.
Well, this didn't make it into the movies. It's and I don't necessarily remember the books all that well, just because it's been a long time since I've read them. But what I think one of my favorite parts of the books that's not in the movie is Honest Ed's, where basically gravity doesn't work properly at Honest Ed's, and I just thought that was such a great way of looking at Honest Ed's, because I've definitely been in there and was sure that I was on my way to the exit,
right? Yes.
And then I took a wrong turn somewhere, and I was like, where am I? I mean, I think that, you know, and to run that through that filter, to run that through that worldview, I think is just it's what makes the books work, is that it makes its own kind of sense, even if it isn't necessarily reflective of reality.
Yeah, no, it has rules, and we can follow them. We just have to figure them out on the fly.
Right.
And that's the other, just the way that the casual living arrangements that Scott and Wallace keep ending up in bed together and apart, there is some sort of personality magnet that makes that okay, that makes it all make sense intuitively. Even though we don't fully understand how Wallace has all the time to go out and date as aggressively as he does. But it's also so damn it's a fantastic hangout movie in that everybody in it is somebody I like. Even the characters who are jerks are still sort of wonderful.
That's true. Yeah, even in as much as there are villains in the movie, Gideon, I guess, being the main bad guy in the movie. Yeah. He has those lines where he's like, "Oh, I just came up with this evil exes league because I was just drunk one night and I sent an email." I can't remember if that's the exact line, but it's basically there, I sent an email. Do you know how long it took me to get this whole thing together? 2 hours. Because he sent out some emails and then it was done. And so yeah, there's definitely an element of and you're right. It is funny though, because the stakes there are life and death stakes related to it in a sense, but they definitely temper that by having people just burst into a bunch of coins as opposed to having any sort of bloodshed or anything like that.
I mean, there are flaming swords in this movie. Nobody
true.
even gets singed. There's just like little hints of bruising here and there.
Yeah.
I honestly think the biggest threat is probably getting yelled at by Stacy. Because that's Anna Kendrick in the perfect pointy role of
that's a great
antagonist.
Little part. Yeah, I really really like that. And the cast is extraordinary, and I really and one of the things about the movie that is something that I picked up, or I mean it's pretty noticeable, but it's something that I really gravitated towards, was the fact that they do have Asian actors in the movie.
Yeah.
In key roles, in major roles, and of course those are characters that were in the books, which were written by a half Korean artist and author, Brian Lee O'Malley, and then they were faithful to that and translated it to the film. And I think Knives Chow is a character that I haven't really seen in a major motion picture. And and Ellen Wong is really, I think, incredible in that role. But that sort of lovelorn Asian schoolgirl character isn't something that you see much of unless you're looking at the background of a movie where there's a bunch of Asian schoolgirls posing in front of a landmark and then they walk away, or I don't know.
She's on the monitors in Cabin in the Woods, but she's not in the main story.
Exactly.
Or she's the monster. That kind of representation. I mean, it's true that I just always assumed that it was an essential element of the manga leanings, the things that O'Malley is sort of spoofing, and the Nintendo video game imagery and things like that. But it goes deeper than that because there is more.
I do feel like it's a movie that really shows you how not a big deal it would be if you just kind of populated your casts with actors who were people of color, and it's not. And it's sort of an interesting thing because it's, again, I think that her being Chinese is essential to her character, but it's not essential in the way that it is in, the Joy Luck Club or a movie about geishas or whatever the thing is.
It doesn't fulfill a specific requirement.
Yeah, it's not. That's not the raison d'être of her character. It's actually, but it does color the way that she interacts with Scott, and it colors the way that she, that whole relationship goes. And Sacha Babia, which I'm not sure is exactly how you pronounce that, but the fellow who plays the first evil ex-boyfriend, I mean, he has sort of a Bollywood style musical number.
Self-aware introduction.
Yeah, that's how he's that's his moment in the movie, and that's. Again, it's totally different from every other fight in the movie. I mean, every fight has its own individual flavor. It's the characters determine really how each fight is in terms of style and in terms of even the sound design, because of course the bass battle is very different from Roxy and fleeing her I'm not even sure what you'd call that.
I think power staves, maybe?
Power staves? Okay,
I'll
go with that.
I'm probably wrong. Or that's what Mockingbird uses. It's a cool sounding. It's a cool sounding weapon.
I think I think that's a really cool weapon.
they explode, right? So they're not totally staves.
Well,
the power part. The power part explains it. But it's all very precise and character driven. Like even the fights evolve out of who the fighters are.
Right, and the bass battle, because bassists or the essential quality of bass being that kind of keeping time and having a very slow build. I mean, I think that, you know, that again, totally different from something a little more active like Roxy, again throwing her stuff around while Ramona's throwing the is it a hammer?
It's a hammer, yeah.
It's a hammer. It's a Thor.
It's kind of a Thor
hammer, yeah. Throwing her Thor hammer around. And so to have that first introduction, and then of course the twins, the twins who, even though they don't have any dialogue in the film per se, I mean they're Japanese, very handsome, and of a very particular style of Japanese young man. And their battle, of course, involving their music, being able to create these monsters that are, you know, pushing forcefully against the band playing at the exact same time.
Yeah, which is a sort of weird Forbidden Planet kind of image to it as well. The shape that you can only determine through its effect on space instead of an actually defined monster.
Right, yeah.
It's just, again, he just keeps finding, both O'Malley and Wright executing them in 3D reality, are just finding new ways to express the simplest and pettiest of emotions, right? Which is simply that you're dating my girlfriend and I don't like you.
Right. And I think that, again, that's what makes it so relatable and so interesting, although it does bring up something that is kind of the one quibble I have about the movie, which I have always had a little bit of trouble getting a handle on, which is the character of Ramona. Mm-hmm. Because I find that the more that I watch the film, and when I watch the film a number of times, and on occasion I will maybe pick a different character to kind of be my focus in terms of me tracking their journey throughout the film.
Right.
And with Ramona, I kind of feel like I'm missing some parts of her actually falling for Scott. I kind of almost feel like she falls for Scott and invests in that relationship because that's kind of what the story needs her to do, more than I think it's actually something that comes motivated from her character. Yeah. And it's not even that I think that she's a one-dimensional character, because I don't. I do think that that she's given on her backstory, and she's definitely, and Mary Elizabeth Winstead is such a soulful actor, and so she really grounds that character. But I feel like I'm missing, I feel like I'm filling in gaps in terms of really buying into the relationship with Scott, and also with Gideon to an extent. Although I think with Gideon, I think we are kind of buying a little bit that the access he has to her brain is a little bit that thing where people can sometimes just have an effect on you and you don't know why, and you'll let yourself be treated badly in a relationship because of it. And so I definitely see where that comes from, but at the same time I do movies that have male protagonists where there is a romantic element, I do think sometimes that the female character might not necessarily get the same extent of motivation and substance in order to figure out how it is that the kind of selfish, emotionally immature protagonist who's about to learn something from this hot, amazing woman that he's about to meet, how that actually works on her end, and how that actually affects her on her end.
Yeah, we talked about that actually in the Sarah and Wright and me. We discussed it in the first wave of interviews in the summer of 2010 when they brought the film to town. And one of the things that came up was that it's entirely possible that until the very end of the film we don't really see Ramona for who she is, or who she really is, because we're getting Scott's version of her, and Scott's version of Gideon, who is incredibly successful and put together and suave, and he's kind of a dick, but he still gets Ramona to listen to him, so obviously he must be using some sort of evil magic.
Right.
And the Ramona that we do see is maybe a little unknowable because Scott isn't trying, and that she is the shiny thing that he's fixated on. And I'm actually quoting at this point, that's exactly what they said.
Right.
She's the next shiny thing. She's the prize in the video game of his life. And so he perceives her as perfect and wonderful and totally put together, and she's so confident that she barely has time to talk to him, and that little throwaway, dude, I change my hair every couple of weeks.
Right.
She just doesn't care how he feels, which isn't true, probably, because she's falling for him as well, supposedly. But from Scott's extremely limited perspective, that's all he can process is like, this girl is awesome, and I have to be there, and I have to be with her, and I will do anything to be with her, and that's what the 7 X's come in, and when we see what challenges really mean. But I think that it's unfortunately intentional that Ramona is sort of a two-dimensional figure for most of the movie, that Winstead imbues her with a lot of humanity. She sort of lets it peek through. But yeah, it is a limited perspective.
I think that, and what's interesting about that is, I definitely understand how that is, because the film very much is, whether or not it's reality or not, it's very much all put through Scott's point of view and the way that he sees the world. And it's sort of interesting because I did, before I, literally just on the weekend, take a look at the deleted scenes on the DVD, which was sort of interesting because I knew I was coming to talk about it, so I thought, I wonder what I could actually learn from seeing this. And there's the first date scene, which they have a couple of versions of it on the DVD, where there's a middle section that's not in the finished film, where you actually see her warm up to Scott a little bit, where she's laughing, she tells a joke about, she's joking around about the fact that she can tell that Scott and Wallace are sleeping in the same bed, and it's a really brief, it's just a little middle section there, but when I watch the scene in the movie, that's always the scene where I'm like, I don't see how we get from here to here.
Right, yeah,
I mean, that might be it. I mean, that's kind of the moment where I'm like, and so I definitely can appreciate that it was a deliberate choice, in the sense that, Scott really does learn something about himself. Again, the power of self-awareness. He does, learn about how he does get a point of view on how he's been treating both Ramona and Knives, and I guess it is something, though, where I feel like I really want to be rooting for them.
Yeah.
And so it can be, at times it is challenging to root for Scott when he's being particularly selfish, or particularly, self-absorbed.
Yeah.
But again, I do think, listen, I've seen movies that are such horrible, egregious examples of them not caring, what the woman wants in the situation. And I do think that as I mentioned, I do think that she has a character that is intriguing, and that they also attempt to establish, because she does kind of have a little bit of a mysterious past, in a sense. I mean, there's that thing where they're like, she's from New York, and that's of course such a Toronto thing to kind of be whispering about people who are from New York, and I think that the other characters in the film, the further away you get from Scott, I think the characters are by necessity a little more outlandish in their construction, and don't necessarily have all the dimensions there. But, even a character like Envy Adams, I think you can see that little bit of vulnerability from when she was in a relationship with Scott. So even though we don't get a lot of her, and I love Brie Larson, that's one of the movies where I don't see Envy Adams in any of the other parts that she's done, and I think it's remarkable. Yeah. But
when I sat down with her at TIFF this year, it's just like, all that matters is that I'm sitting down with Envy Adams. I've seen Short Term 12. I know she's a phenomenal actor.
Oh, Short Term 12, yeah, it's an amazing movie. Yeah,
she's fantastic, and she's great in Room. And this drops on I want to say the 15th or 16th. So in 10 days, hopefully she'll have an Oscar for that. And that'll be great.
Of course, yeah.
And then we can just add her to the list of incredible talents that bursts out of this movie already.
Right.
Things that are already resident in there. And Envy Adams is in 2 scenes? Just an incredible, fully drawn character.
And she has to sell the line, "You punched my boyfriend so hard he burst." Yeah. And I think that might be the hardest line in the whole film to sell, where again it has to be grounded in something, and
it has to have feeling.
Exactly.
instead of like a snide whip crack of the line at the end. Yeah, and Roxy too. I mean, Mae Whitman does that. She manages to find real hurt, and not just because she got punched in the boob, which is a fantastic line in the movie too, but just that weird indignance that she brings to the role of someone who is, presumably she has enough of her stuff together that she's already moved on, but she's still a little hurt, and she's still letting that show.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, like Anna Kendrick and Mae Whitman and Brie Larson, I mean, they've all had opportunities to carry movies in the last few years where they're the top billed top billed person, number one on the call sheet, and it's extraordinary the range that they have, and then to have and to be able to watch a movie where they're all firing on all cylinders in characters that are so unlike characters that they would probably ever get to play again, is one of the fun parts of the movie for sure.
Yeah, I mean the casting like right down the line. There isn't a role that's out of place. Like Chris Evans, just perfectly doing Lucas Lee. I
think I like watching Chris Evans because of this movie. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
because it's clear that from Scott Pilgrim that he got it, and he has a sense of humor about the kind of action hero archetype. And that's a great that is a really that is a really terrific character.
Just that marvelous entitled idiocy that he brings to it.
My goodness, yeah.
And then like he's less than a year from Captain America, where he'll be completely different in the same sort of part. Or I'm forgetting somebody else. Like it really is a murderer's row of walk-on roles. You've got Brandon Routh and Jason Schwartzman as Gideon Graves is just perfectly dickish. Like it is the role he was born. Having interviewed him a few times, it is the role he was born to play. But he's just so good at it, and I don't mean that in a cruel way. There's just a bit of a snark to his personality.
Oh, he leans into it. Yeah, he really does.
It right up.
And I forgot to mention Alison Pill, who's probably I mean, she might even be my favorite character in the film. I mean, her her asides and or I guess interjections are just they're just so dead on. They're delivered with such deadpan precision that it's. Her character, I think
that's true. She is the most deadpan and effective in a movie that also has Aubrey Plaza in it.
Yeah, that's true.
That's an accomplishment.
I mean, Aubrey Plaza's really fun in the movie too. But because Alison Pill's character Kim, she has the history with Scott. I think that also lends that little bit of edge to what she's doing. Because of course, in the first scene when we find out that. He has his fake teenage girlfriend, where Scott has his fake teenage girlfriend. She's the first one to kind of give him shit about that. But you kind of realize later on in the film, like, oh, he probably wasn't that cool to Kim when they were going out, because they were probably pretty young, and because they're in this band together, they've never probably really been too far from each other at any point in time. And somehow she kind of communicates that without really saying anything. I mean, there's a couple of points where they literally just cut to her looking. I don't know if the death glare is the right description from it, but it's kind of this glare,
side eye kind of thing
that works so well. And actually, one of the things that I noticed this time through is literally the part where they're just going to the party, and it's Scott. And then young Neil.
Right.
And then you just see Kim, who's a little bit off to the side, and she's standing stock still. She is just standing stock still while they do their little bit about this sucks. And they're standing quite still as well. Yeah. But Kim isn't saying anything, and she's just a statue. It's a really it's those kinds of details that I really appreciate about the film. I mean, even just really small things like the way that Scott wipes his hands after he's washed them they lend so much to deepening the character and just being really good for a laugh. But they are obviously particularly chosen details that make that go into a film.
And that lets us into the other side of the movie, which, in addition to the incredible miracle of casting and direction of the actors, you have a film that is, like, in terms of its technical accomplishments, just magnificent to watch. To take a story this small and one could argue disposable, because like, this could be, in the wrong hands, this could just be an MTV party movie,
right
which would be fine, but this one is so much more interesting. Sorry, I apologize once again to our listeners for the snoring dog. Someday I will figure out an Audacity hack that removes the snoring, but
it's too bad. Yet. It's too bad Dexter isn't an Edgar Wright fan. He might be a little more awake.
They have met. There is that. The first summer we got Dexter was the year that Scott Pilgrim opened, and so Kate and I were walking him. We couldn't have had him for more than 2 or 3 weeks. The weekend of the Scott Pilgrim Toronto press day, and bumped into Edgar and Anna Kendrick just wandering around Chinatown, and we introduced them, and ever since then Anna always asks after him and makes me show photographic evidence that I'm treating him well.
Right. Well, it was very exciting for the movie to be in town. I mean, it kind
of was great.
It was a very cool thing. Edgar Wright was programming over at the Bloor Cinema before it was the Hot Dog Cinema. I was there for Double Bill Pope, which was
nice.
The double bill they did of Army of Darkness and Team America World Police, which were both cinematographed. The cinematographer of both those films was Bill Pope, who was of course the cinematographer of Scott Pilgrim, and Edgar Wright chatted with him on stage about making those films, which are obviously very, very unique films in terms of their level of complexity. The puppets in Team America, for one.
Sure.
Anyway, but it was it was a fun thing. He did that, and then everybody who was working in the film business at the time. I mean, if they weren't working on it, they knew somebody who was working on it. It touched everybody in some way.
Well, it was a very big, complicated shoot, too. It went on for months and months, and most of the post was done here as well, I believe, and so it just kept everything going.
I would walk down Bloor and see the fake snow piled up, in the streets, and as I recall, or possibly they built it on a soundstage, set, because Lee's Palace had been renovated since the time.
Yeah, they did have to recreate
it was in the books, so they either made a set or changed it or something like that.
Yeah. I don't know if he told me about it or if it came up somewhere else and I remember it, but they did have to recreate Lee's Palace. Jackie Chan, coverage. Yeah, I'm just going through the transcript of our interview just because I thought it would be easier, and we're talking about Scott Pilgrim fighting salmon. We're talking about salmon. Stephen Chow. Yeah, these are all the things that he was
Stephen Chow movie. Yeah, I could see how Stephen Chow movies could be an inspiration into a film like this one.
Yeah, it's Michael Cera was really quiet and very kind of calm for the first 5 minutes of our conversation, and then Edgar mentioned showing him Park Chan-wook movies and Jackie Chan and Pang Cheng, and he suddenly just perks right up and starts talking about which move he preferred in 36 Chambers of Shaolin and all that. And it's just, he finally committed to the conversation, and in a weird way that sort of felt like who Scott is, where you really have to engage his interest to get him to comment. And I don't know where this is. I'm looking for it. There's a thing here about Indian restaurants and how raccoons can fuck you up.
Oh gosh. Raccoons in Toronto.
There aren't any raccoons in the movie, but you figure there would be. Yeah, I'm not sure where it is. It must be somewhere else in there.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah. Or was it Brandon Routh? Here's a quote of I didn't realize how glowy my eyes were going to be. But,
that's something about the film that I think when you have characters that are this heightened or have sort of a comedic purpose or that kind of thing, the actors really have to trust that the director isn't going to make them look like an idiot. I mean, that's kind of the biggest. That might be the biggest thing about doing a part like that, is that you want to be able to you want to be able to just have the actors feel totally comfortable just to get out there and try something. And it doesn't necessarily mean that, that they can just do anything that they want. But if the director has the vision in mind or the ideas in mind for what they want to do, and then the actor can kind of run with it, sometimes it means that they will have to protect that performance in editing, because there may be takes or things that they try that end up being totally wrong for the entire for the overall film. And of course that's true of any movie. I mean, that's certainly not unique to a movie like this one, but I definitely think that a movie like this one probably has a little more possibility for falling flat on its face if that doesn't work out really well. And I think that's what's so remarkable about it to me, is that they can kind of have those characters that are a little bit more out there, and then have the characters that are a bit more grounded but are still funny and absurd in their way, and have it feel totally perfect for the environment that they're in, and not have it feel like jarring. Have it feel jarring at any point, really.
Yeah, well, even one actor out of tone, or there's so many plates to keep in the air. There's the performances, then there's the style of the cinematography, then there's the score and the music, the soundtrack, things that you can't even account for on the day when you're shooting, and it all just, I mean, the thing that amazes me about Edgar Wright is that he can build the movie in his head as he's shooting it. Like, now he's cutting it in his head. The fight scenes in Scott Pilgrim's, a lot of them, and especially the final conflict between Scott and Gideon, was really just a few frames at a time. They would do entire setups, right. And even in the dialogue scenes, and this was something else that he had said, that he and Pope decided that because they were trying to replicate a comic book aesthetic, no two shots could have the same setup. If you were cutting back from an over-the-shoulder, the camera would still have to be moved, because if you were drawing it, you wouldn't be able to replicate it exactly.
Right,
so
right.
Everything had to be just the littlest piece to the left or the right, or up or down, or the light had to be different. Something had to change in every shot. You could never go back to an existing setup. And that kind of obsessive planning, I think, is the only way you can make a movie that's this complex and make it look like you had it in mind all along. Like, the only way to do it as if it was totally off the cuff is to plan every single aspect of it,
right,
and then
right.
still somehow allow for life in the performances, which is just like there's timing, and there are little moments of reaction and delivery that you can't account for. They have to happen in the moment.
Yeah, Edgar Wright's a filmmaker that when I see his movies, I really just feel like he has total understanding and control over the tools that he has at his disposal. Disposal. I almost said disposable. I think that the editing in his films is particularly noteworthy, and it's not even anything that you can. I mean, editing is one of those skills that it's hard to really say anything specific about it, because it's like, oh, you're cutting here instead of here. Mm-hmm. But of course, if you cut here instead of here, that can create a laugh where there wasn't one. That can change the. I think of a detail like that running gag of Scott thinking his hair is too shaggy, and him being self-conscious about it, because in his previous relationship, his girlfriend would make note of that, and so he wears his hunter's cap. He throws his hunter's cap on top of it, and the joke, of course, is that every time you cut back to him, he's already got the hunter's cap on. Yeah. It's not that you watch him putting it on, and it's that he actually has it on, and I think part of that can be can be attributed to a comic book style as well, because of course sequential art is missing things in between. Sure, in between pictures, but that's also where the laugh is. The laugh is that and it works, and it works within the style of the movie. It's not a thing where it can be difficult, I think, in some of these big comedies where they'll put something in the movie specifically just to get a laugh, but it's something that throws you out of the reality of whatever reality that movie has built up for itself. Whereas with Scott Pilgrim, from the word go, they've built up this reality that allows them to have jokes like that in the film and have it totally be a part of. Again, as you're saying, it's something they've totally planned. It's something they've figured out. Okay, this this is the kind of joke, even if they came up with it on the day, they know that it's going to be able to cut into the movie and not be something that sticks out.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, having seen the bonus features on Shaun of the Dead, and there's this wonderful 15-minute whiteboard sequence on the Shaun DVD and Blu-ray where Wright and Simon Pegg run us through the entire movie act for act by flipping the pages of a giant whiteboard on which they've basically just sketched out every scene and the meaning of given moments and all the jokes and callbacks that are going to echo and the emotional resonance. And they do it the day before shooting was supposed to start, I think, just to prove that they had it all in their heads.
Right.
And it is simultaneously so exhaustively detailed and so enthusiastic about the possibilities that it allows them, the way that they can build these nested storylines into a narrative that takes place over 24 hours and is just rushed and panicked, and a horror film that is as valid as a horror film as it is a relationship picture and coming of age movie. They're just bursting with ideas, and I don't doubt that he approached Scott Pilgrim the same way. I don't think he's capable of making a movie without that level of resonance or that interest in resonance that he so desperately needs to make the movie more than just what it's about. It has to be about 6 or 7 other things, and they all have to come together in an almost. I mean, Scott Pilgrim, more than any of his other films, it sticks the landing so gracefully that you almost don't know that it's over. When it ends, it has this little poof kind of feeling where it just all evaporates, and either it's evaporating because Scott is leaving this part of himself behind and moving on to maturity, or because we've had a lot of fun, folks. Maybe it's time to go home now. It doesn't even matter because your experience has been steered so beautifully, and you've had the opportunity to notice all this wonderful stuff, and it's just such an elegant ending for a film that is so frenzied and chaotic.
Right. Yeah.
That it feels like you've leveled up along with the movie.
And and I do appreciate that about the film, because it to end a film that has that much going on in it. Yeah. In a really simple, and I say simple because that's deceptive to end something that simply, but it's deceptively difficult to end something that simply. It really is about the relationships. It really is about the relationships with. Well, it is about knives, but it's mostly about Ramona and what. And again, they do kind of leave that open, right? Because it's not that they've decided anything. It's not a happily ever after scenario. But and of course, the last thing that you see on the screen is the continue, the video game continue screen, with the question mark at the end of it. And again, it's you really have to know what your movie is about and really be able to zero in on the core of that movie in order to be confident about ending it in that way, in a way that's not the usual. Dipping the woman and having the screen, the Hollywood screen kiss, or whatever the equivalent would be in modern day.
It's triumphant, but it's ambiguous and or ambivalent, and it's kind of wonderful. Like, this is over, but now what?
Exactly. Yeah.
he gives it so much. Like, it's bristling with potential. David Koepp, when I interviewed him for Ghost Town, said that he has a thing about ending movies on the possibility of happiness. It's much more interesting to him to go with that instead of a happily ever after, because nobody really believes in happily ever after, because relationships, even after the initial endurance test of winning someone over, relationships are still work, and you have to work at being happy, and you have to fight for the possibility of happiness. And so, Ghost Town ends with Téa Leoni saying, "I have a problem with my smile," and Ricky Gervais saying, "I can help you with that." Right. And Scott Pilgrim kind of does the same thing, in that you are sending these characters off onto the real adventure of coexisting as equals, or at least as partners, and figuring out what that means. And I'm not sure Scott is ready for that, but I also think that I want to believe that Ramona will be a little more patient than she has been up until now, and maybe help him get there.
Yeah, for sure.
Because I'm an optimist. And I want these two crazy kids with their giant hammers and their smashy coins to be friends.
Well, you do. I think you do see the possibilities, and that can be a nice thing, for sure.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously, people connect to that too, because if the ending didn't work, they wouldn't be coming. You wouldn't come back to it as wholeheartedly as they are. And certainly, the crowd at the Royal the other week was just. I mean, there were about 6 Ramonas, and I counted a couple of Kniveses, at least one Scott. Although it's hard to tell because they kind of blend into each other.
When you see a Scott, do you think, oh, that's Scott, or do you think, oh, is that just a guy on the streets of Toronto?
That's a cold guy in Toronto in January. And it was the coldest night of the year, which was even more perfect. For a year where we haven't had much of a winter, that was the elements aligned, and it was just miserably cold. There are a good 60 or 70 people outside waiting, and we had to turn them away. Oh. I felt terrible. But... it was so great to see the room light up, though. When we had Colin Geddes, who runs the Royal, had reached out to Edgar and gotten him to record a little, like a 65-second clip.
Yeah, I heard. Yeah,
it's on the Facebook.
Oh, great!
And it's just it's so swell. Yeah. He's clearly so happy with the movie he made, and so happy that people are still coming out to see it and discovering it. And I think he must have been in Los Angeles, but he looked cold on our behalf.
Right.
He looked like he was feeling it along with us.
Well, I will just one more thing about the film, which is that even though there is a lot going on, I mean, there's the action scenes especially. You're always oriented. It's never a disorienting experience. I mean, that's shooting, that's editing, that's all those things, where it's not just cuts for the sake of cuts. It's not speed for the sake of speed. You really do understand what's happening at every moment. It's totally comprehensible, and that's a sign that the film obviously was very well put together, and so I think because I do I have met some people who are not fans of Scott Pilgrim, and
really? Do you still speak?
Do I still speak to them? That was one of the most interesting things about when the movie first came out, because a lot I do know a lot of people went to see it and either because they knew it was a Toronto set film or whatever the reasons. I'm sure. I'm sure everybody looked at it and had a take on what it might be, and then I think when some people came out of it, maybe it wasn't what they expected it to be,
right.
And I do think and I have tried to watch the film where I'm trying to understand how some people could find it to be a lot or to be obnoxious in some way, and of course I because I don't really get that sense, but I do think there's a difference between a film that's frantic for the sake of being frantic, or too fast and too cutty, as it were.
Yeah.
And I just don't I just don't think this film is that. I do think that at every moment I really am following what it is that they want me to follow in the story. And that's a really boring way of saying that I really like the movie, I guess. But
I get what you mean. Like, it allows you to enjoy it in all of its excess, in all of its motion and action and speed, but it doesn't overwhelm. It's like eating the best. Like, for me, the thing I've always fallen back on is, like, it's the best bowl of popcorn I've ever had.
Right.
And by the time the movie came out, I was off popcorn because you hit 40 and it all goes to hell. And my GI guy said, no, you got to stop eating that. They're like razor blades for your colon. That's a quote too.
Oh dear.
So I haven't had popcorn in 6 years, but Scott Pilgrim makes me want popcorn again.
Right.
Damn you, Edgar. Damn you all to hell.
Well, I thought you might have been referring to actual action movies that were just getting you bored because it was just the same thing over and over and over again.
Yeah, the monotony of the everything Michael Bay does kind of approach, where I know he's my
whipping boy.
Yeah, I was trying to come up with. There's a horse metaphor that's even better, but he is absolutely my go-to goat on this show, where if I need to come up with an example of cinema that just makes you sad for experiencing it, it's Michael Bay. And again, Edgar managed to do that. He managed to redeem Michael Bay with the Bad Boys 2 jokes in Hot Fuzz,
right,
and execute them perfectly. But the Benghazi movie, I think I saw the Benghazi movie 2 days after the Scott Pilgrim screening, and it's exactly what Scott Pilgrim isn't, which is that it is exhaustively frenetic and cut to not even within an inch of its life, but to millimeters of its carotid artery where it just, if you cut any more, it will cease to have any meaning. And it was shot with handheld video, and it's muddy and dirty, and it's supposed to look real, but it's just boring.
Confusing, maybe.
Well, it becomes a paste. Like it just it's action cutting as an anesthetic somehow, or a sedative, because you can't invest in anything. So you just stop. You just stop caring. I feel that way about all the Transformers movies, because it's just 2.25 or 2.5 or 2 3/4 hours of software fighting software while the camera swings around, and every shot is gorgeous and looks like car commercials, because it kind of is. But I don't care. I want to care so much at the beginning of every movie, because that will keep me invested and it won't be as boring.
Sure,
and the time will go by faster. And
2 hours can feel like forever if you're not involved, if you're not invested in what's happening.
Yes, yeah. And Edgar's movies all go by like bullet trains, and there's an emotional investment. And I mean, I will argue and have argued and have written it down and everything that I think Shaun of the Dead is the film of the last decade, of the first 10 years of 2000s, because it is an active work of art that perfects the mashup. I mean, it is Galaxy Quest, I think, is the first one.
Oh, yeah.
It kind of smashes together comedy and science fiction in a way that no one had tried before. Mm-hmm. The Star Trek aspect of it and the self-reflexive thing. But Shaun, by functioning as a horror movie and as a coming-of-age story and as a love story with real stakes, and characters whose death has meaning, which even the most successful horror films don't always manage.
That's true, yeah.
It's a new thing, and it has yet to be duplicated. I don't think anybody's even come close to figuring it out the way that Wright and Pegg did. And what he's done since is build on that potential by releasing movies that are as involved and as invested with the genre that they're working in that Hot Fuzz deconstructs the Michael Bay / Catherine Bigelow, Joel Silver action production in the way that The World's End is, as he put it, Withnell and AI, where he finds this incredible middle ground between the intervention movie narrative and the science fiction apocalypse.
Right.
And Scott Pilgrim invents a genre that had never been truly caught before, which is the graphic novel movie, in that it works on its own. If you've never read a comic book, you'll get it. You can understand the tropes that he's using. But it also brings to life an entire slice of culture, and not just Western or manga culture, but global illustration culture, and it makes you understand why people will occasionally say, oh, comic books are just storyboards for movies. Well, in this case, we actually have a movie that was storyboarded from a comic book, but found everything. It found the life in it. And,
right.
You know, in the rearview mirror, Scott Pilgrim's right up there with Shaun now for me, and I'm kind of surprised by that, because when I saw it the first time, I thought,
well, both of the movies are. I mean, I love them both. I mean, they're so different from each other. To kind of put them up next to each other, they could be companion pieces more than I think they're in competition with each other.
Well, but that's the surprise. The first time I saw Scott Pilgrim, I thought, ooh, that should have been a half hour longer. It just feels so compressed. And now, of course, I realize that's part of it. That's the reason it feels compressed, is because it is overstuffed with all this wonderful.
Well, the thing is, I don't play video games. I am a casual comic book reader, and my tastes tend a little bit more towards Adrienne Tomine and Daniel Close and that kind of thing. And so I don't think I've ever read any manga inspired or manga style books before or after Scott Pilgrim, and yet somehow the movie still hits me right in the pleasure center. It's right in, it hits the part of me that I guess it's the cinephile in me. It must be the just the mastery over over all of the elements that really just work so well and turns it into this fun concoction. I think that's I think if you're somebody who does play video games and read comic books read a lot of superhero comics and that kind of thing, I think it definitely I imagine it's something that feels personal almost. It feels like something that where you can't, maybe you are Scott, maybe you are that guy, maybe you have that affinity for the same things and feel the same things that he does. And even if I don't relate in the specific to Scott Pilgrim, I relate to him on on the level that I think I'm expected to as an audience member.
Yeah. I think I see myself as more of a young Neil. Just uncertain.
Absolutely.
Navigating very carefully through the environment and making sure I don't offend anybody.
And hey, now he's Neil, so,
That's true.
baby steps, right?
He gets to be proper Neil. Yeah. It did occur to me, watching Scott Pilgrim again, just prepping for this, that someone else is carrying it on and doing the same thing, and that's the people making Man Seeking Woman. The Jay Baruchel show on FXX.
Okay.
They're the only ones I've seen that are using the same sort of flexible reality principle that Scott Pilgrim does, where the most absurd and impossible things happen, and the characters all react to them almost in a blasé manner, and the way that things simply are. And it took me, I've been watching the show since it started airing last year, and it took me this long to figure it out, to put them together. It's like, oh, that's actually the same principle. Someone else is doing it on a teeny budget, but it's still here. They shoot it in Toronto with a Canadian lead, and maybe we're the only nationality that's flexible enough to get away with it.
Well, I've seen a bit of the show. I haven't just because I don't have the channel that it's on. I don't think I haven't yet been able to catch up on the rest of it. But it is interesting that it hasn't been more widely attempted, I guess, in a way where that again, that, as you mentioned, the flexible reality. I mean, it's such an interesting concept, and it seems like it would be very rich for a rich vein to mine for a TV series. But I'll actually have to check it out and see, because that's very cool.
It's definitely worth seeing, and the because it's shot in Toronto, the talent base is remarkable.
Yeah, well, there you go. It's Canada's always the stand-in for somebody else, and so that's kind of what's great about Scott Pilgrim, is that you can kind of you actually have a thing that's set here. Yeah,
we get to own it, which is kind of marvelous. And this brings us to the question that closes the show, which is, what if anything, of Scott Pilgrim have you incorporated into your work, or stolen or borrowed or relied upon? I mean, I know that in End of Days Incorporated, we're not explicitly located in Toronto, but the landscape is sort of part of it.
It is. I will say that I think Scott Pilgrim and Edgar Wright's films are more a source of inspiration for me than something that I think I'm pulling specific things from. But the feature film I have coming out this week, End of Days Inc., it is a film that is totally different in content, themes, etc., style, etc., but it is a little bit of a genre hybrid that has characters that are a little bit further up and down the outlandish scale than the average naturalistic feature film. So in that sense, I will say that I think I've watched a lot of Edgar Wright's films just to get a sense of how he accomplishes that, about, trying to make sure that when cutting performances, like getting that right mix of humor, but then also making sure that you're grounding the characters that need to be grounded in order for the audience to be able to follow along. So it's not something that's just absurd, or it's not something that they can just throw away necessarily. But yeah, I think that I think that's it's something to aspire to have that kind of control and focus and mastery over the filmmaking process, where you can make something that people really respond to. And that's something I think all filmmakers aspire to do.
Yeah. Well, and you also had mentioned the question of representation in Scott Pilgrim, and it seemed that in End of Days that Paul
Lee,
is definitely, he kind of gets the showcase part without going into detail, just based on what you allow him to do versus what everybody else is doing.
Absolutely. Paul Lee's character, which, the script was not written with any particular actor in mind, and it certainly wasn't written with actors of any particular, race in mind. Mm-hmm. And Paul, I felt like he could embody the stuck-up, pretentious aspects of that character, as well as what he has to do later on in the film, which is much different and much more.
Shall we say more broadly comic?
More broad, yeah. Let's put it that. Say that more broadly comic.
But he is just having seen him over the last couple of years, where he's gone and what he's doing. It's really a pleasure to see him just
cut loose,
doing that.
Be his true self. Let's be honest. That's Paul Lee being his true self when he's at his most broadly comic.
Well, he's very good at it.
to find the right mix of people in an ensemble is always is always a challenge, and it's always something that that does require you to be looking at the whole picture and not just each individual. And yes, I mean, of course, again, looking at the cast of Scott Pilgrim, that's really remarkable. And I actually think I lucked out pretty well in the cast that I have for for End of Days Inc. I mean, I think they all have really strong. They had a really strong understanding of what we were doing, and they really trusted me. And I think that's all you can really ask for.
Yeah. And it's going to release now. So do you have anything else coming up? Is there something you're working on?
I'm trying to work on some scripts, but it takes a long time to get those off the ground and that type of thing. One of the fun things I've been able to do over the last while is that I'm a creative consultant on a series that Karen Walton is developing. It's the adaptation of the Ava Lee novels that Ian Hamilton writes.
I didn't know you were doing that one. That's great.
Yeah, it's. I mean, Karen's just an incredible writer, and what's been really fun about it is to actually be able to bring some of my feedback to something that isn't mine. Yeah. Where I get the fun part where I get to look at scripts and outlines and stuff and talk about. And give feedback on that, and then she has to do all the heavy lifting at this point. So, so that's been something that's really fun to do, and I my fingers are crossed for her, because I really do hope that she can get a show on the air.
Yeah.
If not this one, then another one.
I think, is there anything else? Did we miss anything? I think we got it all covered, but
I think we nailed it. I think we totally figured out Scott Pilgrim versus the World. We've this is it. This is it, guys.
Good. Well, you can still watch it again, but now you'll be enlightened.
Awesome.
My thanks to Jennifer Liao, whose new movie End of Days Inc. opens in Toronto at the Carlton Cinemas this Friday, February 19th, and screens in the Vancouver International Women in Film Festival, March 11th. Follow the movie on Twitter at End of Days Inc., all one word, and Inc. is with a C, for more theatrical dates and VOD release information. You can find Jennifer on Twitter at AverageJen, all one word, with 2 N's in Jen, and you can find Scott Pilgrim vs. the World in a jam-packed Blu-ray and DVD special edition from Universal Studios Home Entertainment and for rental or sale on iTunes and Google Play. You should buy it. It's epic. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Norm Wilner and elsewhere on the internet at nowtoronto.com. You can also find this podcast on Twitter at Semcast, S-E-M-Cast, or on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. If you want to leave a review on iTunes, I would be totally in lesbians with you for that. Thanks for listening.